All right. Next on our agenda is the board working session. I'm going to adjust my view here a little bit. All right. And let me preface this by saying in our bylaws, the immediate past president performs the duties as may be assigned by the president or the board of governors. And as also, the immediate past president will perform the duties of the president in the absence, inability, recusal, or refusal of the president, president-elect, and treasurer to perform those duties. So in the event that I can't function, then President-elect Tollefson steps in. If President-elect Tollefson can't, will recuse himself or refuses, then Treasurer Clark steps in. And then if through all those, Treasurer Clark doesn't recuses himself or refuses, then immediate past President Majumdar grabs the gavel and steps into action. And so also, among the duties assigned to the immediate past president is to work on behalf of the Board of Governors and the officers to ensure appropriate training and education of new Board of Governors members and officers during their term. So our next item is titled Setting the Table, Preparing to Learn and Engage in Equity Work. Now, I understand that this is going to be in conjunction with our HR manager, Jeff Turner, this presentation. It's appropriately labeled Setting the Table, I think, since it's 11 o'clock, and it may run over noon or even into this afternoon after lunch. I'm in my zeal for metaphors. I understand that this will be an a la carte menu of items to choose from, perhaps a buffet of options and a virtual smorgasbord of ideas coming from immediate past President Majumdar and our HR manager, Jeff Turner. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to immediate past President Majumdar for this presentation and enlightening us as to what this work is about.
Yes, and in the event that I'm unable to execute those duties, I believe it's the milkman that comes next. Thank you all for being here. President Cicchetti asked me to help work on training this year, and in starting to prepare for that, based on the commitments this board has made to focus on DEI this year, I started planning that out with the staff. But we realized we were going about it all wrong. And because this must be a collective voluntary experience. So we're not actually doing a training today like I originally planned. A big part of the discussion we've had this last year is about this word accountability and what it means. And I expect that'll be a big part of our dialogue for this entire year. Do we even have a common definition of accountability? For me, it means to hold oneself responsible. So in handling this task I've been given by President Cicchetti, how am I going to be accountable to President Cicchetti and to this board in facilitating the board's needs? That's the question that arose. So I think the first step is committing myself to being transparent and to having transparency and humility in what I do. And what I'm doing is I'm coming to you to ask for help in my task. I'm hoping that in being honest and vulnerable myself, we're going to instill a level of confidence and trust in executing this task. So the very first thing I need to say is that I don't know what all the right answers are or directions to guide our training in. This could be very messy over the year. I don't want to drag anyone kicking and screaming into an involuntary process. So what we want to do is involve you in guiding our collective path, because this is a collective journey. So I pose a couple of questions to help us finding an answer to a bigger question. The bigger question is this: as a group of leaders, how can we collectively create an environment that allows us to heed the Supreme Court's call to action to enable both collective and individual change? That's the big question that we're wrestling with. So I identified two littler questions we need to answer to get on that path. One, how do we assess and support the individual needs of each of the governors to support dialogue? And two, what are the collective needs of this group to foster sustainable change in dialogue? It could be really important for us to do an assessment and name power dynamics to build understanding towards eliminating and restructuring those inherent barriers to dialogue and change. There's 2 points here. Again, one of the things we heard from the MBA meeting we had was the demand for accountability, or as I would put it, holding ourselves responsible to the membership of the WSBA. So that leads us to another question we should wrestle with as a body of leaders. How can we come to a shared understanding of what accountability is? I've proposed a definition, but that doesn't mean it's going to resonate with all of you. How can we have a definition as opposed to seeing it as a scary word? People are trying to hold us accountable. How do we take that as a responsibility rather than a threat? How do we really center what it means to have sustainable relationships with each other, the staff, the membership, and outside entities? We don't need to be bleeding edge in theoretical frameworks and jargon. What we need to have, what this board needs to have, is a growing edge. What we need to identify places we need to move and grow on, and we'll always move and grow on. What skills and resources do we need to develop as a team? It's not a checklist, it's an attitude or culture, part of our everyday practice to improve the organization of our beloved WSBA. So I think there's 4 goals we could achieve this year. I think this body could achieve them over the course of the year pretty easily through our training over the course of the year. And those goals, as I think they might lay out, are these 4 goals. Number 1, how can we create a productive space where governors are able to create and collectively learn, grow, and transform with empathy? Empathy being a high degree of understanding of other people's positions. 2, how can we be accountable to one another? The organization, the membership, and the public. 3, how can we lead with vulnerability and an openness to learn? Vulnerability being an act of courage because you are going to present your authentic selves instead of hiding behind a facade to appease others or the public. 4, how can we develop an organizational culture that allows for intentional listening on the experiences of underrepresented voices and disrupt any structures in place that prevent those ideas and voices from being heard and acted upon, or disrupt structures that allows harm to occur to those groups? The plan for this session is to engage in a facilitated dialogue to develop community agreements or learning agreements, shared agreements between all of us, the board of governors, members, and its officers, about how we want to work together for our learning and development to be successful and productive this year. What do we need to learn about this year? What are you interested in learning about this year? And I thought I should bring in a third party to help facilitate this conversation, because it always seems to be a best practice. And luckily for us, we have our interim HR, I want to say manager, but he's basically serving as our interim HR department, Jeff Turner, here today. I don't know if most of us have got a chance to meet him. I've had a number of telephone conversations with him over this last week. He's been fantastic. Jeff Turner is the managing partner at Praxis HR. He has extensive experience in human resources and organizational development. In addition to being an HR professional, Jeff is a member of our bar association and a member of the labor and employment law section. So he is someone who's engaged, someone who's been engaged with the WSBA. And Jeff has been working with the WSBA as our interim HR director, and as well as administering a challenging task of our employee climate survey, which we'll have the results of in a few weeks, I hope. And with that, Jeff Turner, welcome to the board table.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you all this morning. And we're going to spend the next 45 or so minutes together working on community agreements. And it's a facilitated dialogue, so there's no formal presentation, because it's designed to get your thoughts and input and perspectives on how you want to work together as you embark on this learning and development journey. And we'll work at the pace that works for you, and we will develop the agreements that are going to work for you going forward. So to get started, I'd like to just ask you to think about a few things as we move forward. And you know what the goals are for the year and what you'd like to achieve. But I'd like you to think about a time when you were in a group or a team where you learned and you grew together, right? You were on a team or in a group where you learned and you grew together. What words and phrases come to mind, right? What words and phrases come to mind, and what were the relationships like? So let's just take a second and just sort of ponder that just a bit. It's a way to get the juices going, and then we'll dig into the details of community agreements. All right, anybody who want to share any things that came to mind immediately? Words and phrases when you were on a team where you learned and you grew together. Anybody want to give one response?
I can jump in.
Okay, thank you, Tara.
I think a sense of feeling supported to be vulnerable.
Okay, good. Thank you. So feeling of a sense supported to be vulnerable. Good. Anybody else?
Add problem solving.
Problem solving is part of it. Good. Okay, so supported to be vulnerable, problem solving. What other words and phrases came to mind? So you thought back on that experience. Positive.
Learning to change my positions and compromise. That's probably the biggest thing I've ever learned by being involved with the Board of Governors.
Okay, learning to change your positions and compromise. Got problem solving, supported to be vulnerable. Maybe one or two more, just to kind of get the conversation going.
CFO Perez has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Yes, please.
The phrase that comes to mind on the really high performing team for me was no storytelling.
No storytelling. Okay. Good. Thank you, Jorge.
You bet.
Okay. One more. Anybody? I can see your faces.
I have one more that's a little contrary to it's a little contrary to my first one, but it's when I think about a time when I grew and learned, what the word that really comes to mind is discomfort.
Okay. So discomfort, right? And that could be part of being vulnerable as well, right? As we think about the discomfort. Okay, so we've got supported to be vulnerable, problem solving, learning to change positions and compromise, no storytelling, and discomfort, right? No right or wrong answers to this, right? This is the way that we learn and develop together. And as you work through the skill building and development for equity, diversity, and inclusion over the next several months, right? This can get messy, right? It can get very messy because it's not hard work, it's not sequential work, right? And it doesn't follow a pattern that's predictable in many ways. Jorge, saw your note there? You're muted.
No, I'm sorry. I'll take my hand.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so this, as I was saying, this is it's not predictable work. It can be very amorphous, but it can be incredibly rewarding as you work through it. And unfortunately, there's no set roadmap to get there. So you really have to be involved in a relationship in order to move forward. So let me talk a little bit about what community agreements are, or they're also known as learning agreements, or they're often referred to as shared agreements, or even just agreements, right? And so there's a way that you may want to outline them that's going to work for you. So generally, a community agreement or a learning agreement is a common framework for how people aspire to work and be together as they work on important issues. And the important issue that is under consideration here is diversity, equity, and inclusion work that you're going to embark on over the next several months. And it really is about the relationships, right? It's about the relationships, and the relationship or the agreements are not inconsistent with rules, right? They can coexist, but this is about how you want to be together, or how you aspire to be together in the relationship in order to create an environment where you are learning to develop together, where you are building skills, where you might be, where you're problem solving, to use examples that you came up with, where you're being vulnerable and supported in that effort, where you're compromising as appropriate. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through and get your input on what's going to work for you. This is clearly about you and the relationship that you aspire, relationships you aspire to have as a team, right, to move this work forward. And as Rajiv said, the idea of making sure that you're heeding Supreme Court's charge before you. So let me just make a quick distinction between agreements and rules, just to make sure that we're on the same page. So agreements, as I said before, are an aspiration, right, or a collective vision for how you want to be in a relationship with one another. They're explicitly developed, and that's what we're going to start today through this facilitated dialogue in the next 40 or so minutes. And they represent a consensus on this team. So everyone needs to be bought in, if you will, to these agreements and willing to practice them, right? The key here is practicing, right? So it's being vulnerable and making sure that you're practicing them in your learning journey and day to day as you work together. Rules, on the other hand, are often mandated and enforced by an authority, right? It can be a formal authority or an informal authority, and they don't necessarily reflect the group's will, right? They don't reflect the entire group's will, but they are good for framing things, for making sure that you're operationalizing things or decisions that you make. Agreements and rules can be mutually beneficial, right? And they can coexist and should coexist together in order for you to get the work done that you need to get done, okay? So I'll stop there for a second and answer any immediate questions, and then we'll start digging into the process. Anyone? I'm always tempted to call on people. I happen to be a former professor, so it's easy to kind of move into that mode. So anybody have any questions? No? Okay, I know this isn't a quiet group, but we'll see where we go. Okay, all right, so let's talk about why have community agreements, right? We've talked a little bit about it, but let's kind of think about why is it important for you as governors to have community agreements? Anybody want to chime in there? Well, what are some key things? I came up with 3 or 4 key reasons why it's important to have community agreements or learning agreements, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion learning. Anybody? No? How about, can I ask Governor Williams-Ruth? Can you help me out here? Why is it important to have community agreements? Why do they matter?
Actually, I'm going to, because of some things that I'm dealing with personally, I'm going to just participate as a listener to this conversation. So I thank you for understanding.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think it gives you some direction for the group. If you don't have any direction, it's kind of hard to do anything.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Direction for the group. Okay, perfect. Anyone else?
I'll jump in. I think there's more motivation or buy-in from everybody on an individual level if we've all agreed to the parameters or the decisions going forward or learning objectives.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, one more. Anyone else?
I would say that it promotes consensus, in order to have an agreement. And I would also say that sometimes there isn't consensus, but I think it should be okay for there not to be consensus, but still have civility and respect.
Okay, excellent. So, okay, promotes consensus. Sometimes you may not have consensus, but you can maintain civility and respect, right, in that process. Excellent. Okay, Tara.
I also wanted to add, I think sometimes it's helpful for everyone to know what the agreements are. Otherwise, sometimes there might be unspoken agreements that some people understand, but not everyone does. So it's helpful to articulate them.
Okay, perfect. So to make them explicit, right? Because sometimes we don't know, and often that will happen with things like norms, right? They're not explicit, but we know that they're there, or we may not know that they're there. Good. Okay, one more? I get really greedy here. Anybody else want to add one? See a few smiles. Anybody? Okay. So let me ask the question. Oh, yes.
I just want to know, after we work together for so long and become friends, I just want to know, like, we can have these conversations and still be friends. Like, this is a conversation we have to have, but afterwards, it's not going to stretch our social cohesion.
Okay, good. So you want to know that you can still be friends. Good. That's important. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, as I said earlier, these are all absolutely right on from my perspective. As I said earlier, in this type of work that you're going to embark on, and all of the work that you do, it's really important work. There are a couple of things that come to my mind as well. When we think about these types of conversations, they can often be emotional, right? They can be emotional, painful sometimes, and uncomfortable types of conversations. And it's an area where we often will find ourselves walking on eggshells. And so if you're thinking about agreements and supporting one another, and also having civility and respect as you do this, you can really begin to dig in deep to the content. And also remain friends at the end of the day, right? And disagree about the thing, perhaps, or the issue, but still leave people standing, if you will. And you're modeling, from my perspective, I think you're modeling, what productive relationships look like, right, for members like myself and many of most all of you as governors and many others that are on this call. So you're modeling productive behaviors for members, for the public at large, and for staff, right? That staff can see you modeling that type of behavior, which is a powerful thing, because as leaders of the organization, right, the BOG culture, right, it shapes the organizational culture for the whole, right? So we want to keep that in mind, that so modeling these productive agreements and digging in deeply to complex topics, right, or emotional topics is really important. And leaving people standing at the end of the day is also critical to modeling that type of behavior and having the type of culture that I suspect that you all want. Okay, so we're going to dig into the process, and I'm going to give you a second to reflect, right? I'm going to give you a prompt, and I'd like you to reflect. And for all those that want to participate, I encourage you to do so, right? And I certainly respect if you don't want to participate through the words today, but I really would encourage you to do so that we can gather the information and then we can start to synthesize what's going to work for you. So here's the self-reflection prompt that I want you to think about, and I'll read it to you so that you can hear it. So what do you need? What do you need, right? What do you need from every person in the group, right, to feel safe, supported, open, productive, and trusting, so that you can learn and do your best work? All right, so I'll do it one more time. So it's a long prompt, but what do you need from every person in this group, right, and from your colleagues, right, to feel safe, supported, open, productive, and trusting, so that you can learn and do your best work? Okay, so take a few minutes to think about that. Maybe jot some ideas down that you have, because I'm going to ask you to report out, right? If you feel comfortable doing so, report out your top priorities here. All right, we're going to start with your top priorities. So one more time, what do you need from every person in the group to feel safe, supported, open, productive, and trusting, so that you can learn and do your best work? Okay. So I'll give you two to 3 minutes just to think about it, and I encourage you to just jot your ideas down, right? So that'll help kind of move through the process. Okay. All right, I see people looking up. It's getting close. Okay, so that's been about two and a half minutes or so. So remember the prompt is, what do you need from every person in the group to feel safe, supported, open, productive, and trusting so that you can learn and do your best work? And so you've jotted down your top ideas. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to identify your top one or two. You may only have one or two that came to mind, but you may have more. But I want you to identify your top one or two agreements in priority order, right? So which is the most important and the next most important. And we're going to report out. And again, to the extent that you feel comfortable doing so, but use the opportunity. I encourage you to use the opportunity to build these agreements together, right? You build them together, they're much more powerful for the group. So we'll go around and have each person report out their top one or two. I will jot them down, right? I'll jot them down, and then we'll work on synthesizing them. And then the other group members, so after each person goes, other group members, I encourage you to ask clarifying questions, right? If you need deeper understanding for any of the agreements, and then we'll think about what the consensus is. So can I please have a volunteer to go first? Yes, sir. Okay.
I'll go, but I got three. Sorry.
Okay.
So for me, when I discuss something with someone, it really helps me. And one thing I've learned very helpful in the last couple of trainings, I like hearing other people's shared experiences with the topic. Like, how have they encountered the topic before? And that helps me build empathy to have the conversation with them. Two, one thing I think we really need to avoid, or personally for myself, personal attacks or personal comments, or using the word you. Like, when we stop talking about the subject and start talking about the individuals, I think it's really unproductive and makes things overly personalized. And then two, this is something for me. I'm one of those people, and I don't know if this has to be a rule for us, just a topic I wanted to raise. I'm one of those people who believes lawyers shouldn't have emotions. Like, when they're making an argument, no emotions. Lawyers shouldn't have emotions when they have argument. And that's how I'm comfortable. And I also understand people feel very passionate about things and want to express those things. That's just a third topic I wanted to raise.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any clarifying questions? So we've got share, and I'm paraphrasing, right? Share experiences with the topic, right? Avoid personal attacks and using you as an example, and no emotions as one potential agreement. Anyone have any clarifying questions or thoughts about these three suggested ones?
So I guess my comment would be, I think experiential sharing is great as long as it is being shared. And sometimes in group discussions, people relate their own experiences from, a pretty, what I would call a Ptolemaic view of the universe. So they're talking about their experience without acknowledging that other people might have a different experience. I think it's important for everyone to be able to communicate their experiences equally, is, I guess, my point.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Are there points for clarification that we need to capture before we move to the next person? Okay. So let me paraphrase here again. So the idea is share experiences with the topic, right? Avoid personal attacks using you, no emotions, experiential sharing as long as that you share and acknowledge others' experiences and communicate that to others. Is that paraphrased correctly? Okay, excellent. Who would like to go? Oh, yes.
I have one to share on behalf of Treasurer Clark.
Okay.
Transparency, honesty, and respectful communication of positions are three key cornerstones I think we need for this process to work.
Okay, so again, Tara, I could get it down as quickly as that. Transparency, honesty,
and respectful communication.
Okay, respectful communication needed for this process to work.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anybody want to weigh in on that? right? Any points of clarification, or is there more that you'd like to add, or do we need to explore it in more detail to make sure there's a common understanding? Okay, so we've got transparency, honesty, respectful communication will be needed for this process to work.
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
My reaction to that is it's hard to get a leopard to change their spots as far as infusing maturity and sharing and caring and all that. I don't, you can say all that, but you're asking to change people's personalities. So I'm more into rules that let people inject information that otherwise wouldn't be. In my large 33 years of public defender practice, I've seen so many clients get screwed, going to prison and so forth, because people in the group couldn't be heard because the things that they said were not consistent with the group norms. So I think one has to recognize when it's hopeless to change the group's personality, because everybody thinks they're great, whereas rules are more important to allow everyone to have their say, no matter how obnoxious or nice they are. But that's my strange view of group dynamics.
No, thank you very much. And as we said earlier, as I said earlier, that community agreements or learning agreements are not they're not inconsistent or incompatible with rules, right? They're not inconsistent. They actually often will make the dynamics of the group more powerful. Okay. So anybody want to respond or add any comments or seek clarification? Okay, let's see if someone would like to add their perspective, right? The top one or two that came to your mind.
I have one.
Okay.
Mine might be a little clunkily worded, but the capacity to be intellectually dynamic or flexible. And that is, you know, especially around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, these are ideological constructs. So, and in fact, different folks have different views within, you know, those principles and how they should be applied. But I think in order to understand or even approach a discussion, you've got to have some flexibility in your thinking. You have to be prepared to entertain a point of view that is opposite to yours. And frankly, I struggle with that all the time, but I think it's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me repeat it, and so that I can just the idea. So the capacity to be intellectually dynamic and flexible, right? In order for individuals to have, it's important for individuals to have flexibility in thinking. Is that kind of the essence of it? Great. Okay, thank you. Anyone want to add to that or second motion that one, if you will? Yes.
Yeah, I'll just say mine, which my top two, which I think are somewhat dovetail with Sunitha's, and I like the articulation of being intellectual dynamic. I don't think it was particularly clunky. What I had was sort of a willingness to challenge preconceptions, which I think is perhaps a slight gloss on that, and that's one. But then combined with that was a belief in good intentions, right? A belief that what people are saying is coming from a place of good intentions. Okay. I'll just leave it at that. But
okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we've got a willingness to challenge preconceptions, right? And belief in good intentions. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone want to add to that or add more detail to it based on what you thought were your top priorities that you needed?
Governor Boyd has her hand up.
Oh, okay.
I'll just jump in. Matthew took mine, belief in good intentions, but I think I would add to that that comments or questions that are asked or proposed need to be made with good intentions, with the purpose of learning or moving the discussion forward, not necessarily playing devil's advocate just to play devil's advocate.
Okay, Governor Boyd, so are made with good intentions. So we add to, so comments or questions that are asked and posed are made with good intentions. So starting from that place. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to add to that or comment on that potential agreement?
I have one that's different, but I think related, which is, allowing for good intent. And then also, I would like honest and direct feedback when I have made a mistake so that I have the opportunity to repair.
Okay. Good. Thank you. So allow for good intent and honest and direct feedback when I've made a mistake. Okay. And I heard I
really like Governor Boyd's comment, because we do a lot of advocacy for the devil around this table often. And as lawyers, we do, because that's part of our job. I remember when I came on the board early in my career, like, take off your lawyer hat. And I wouldn't never want to say that, actually, because we bring a very useful set of skills. But I think it is important sometimes to realize the context that our questions come in, and they can be for non-productive purposes, I think.
Okay, thank you. Okay, got that down.
That good intentions is really subjective and can stifle information as well, depending on who's evaluating intentions. How do you regulate that?
That's a good point. So let's talk a little bit about that. So let me make sure that I heard the comment correctly. So good intentions can stifle information. Was that the statement?
Because it's very subjective. Some group members think the intentions are bad when they're good, and vice versa. And so someone has to is intimidated because they're afraid their intentions will be misinterpreted. People should, ideas, I'll take ideas from anybody, from the bum on the street. It's the merit of the idea that matters, not the intentions.
Someone want to respond to that or add to it? So we've got good intentions. Hopefully I'm paraphrasing this correctly. Good intentions can stifle information because it can be subjective. It can be subjective. How can you reconcile this, right? If we think about this from even the agreements that you've already listed as potential agreements, how can you reconcile good intentions that might have the impact, if you will, or the impact of stifling information? How could you reconcile that so that you're not stifling information? Potentially. Yes.
I guess that's not quite the way I see it. I agree with Governor Boyd and past President Majumdar that, playing devil's advocate for the purpose of playing devil's advocate doesn't really advance the ball. So when you're talking about intentions, if the intention is, advancing the discussion, I think there's sort of a difference between debate for simply the purpose of having a debate and a conversation to kind of move the ball forward. I think that sort of dovetails into, I think it was Treasurer Clark's word of transparency. Be transparent with really what you're saying and why you're saying it. And I think I think all of those tie together pretty well and actually encourage discussion rather than discourage it.
Okay, thank you. Let me repeat this to make sure. So paraphrasing, and have the intention to advance the discussion as opposed to simply playing devil's advocate to play devil's advocate, and be transparent with what you are saying and why you're saying it. Is that it? Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that or add another perspective to this idea, or other agreements that are going to be important for you? I can kind of get a sense of what's emerging here as your common thinking around this.
Couple things, I'll jump in. A couple of things that I think might apply is both patience and commitment. The reason I say that is that we are all coming from a different perspective, and some of us have more experience than others on a particular topic, and so it just, you need to be committed to make, if you're trying to make a change, you need to be committed to do so. On the same token, people will need to have patience with me, using myself, because it's just going to take some time. You know, just knowing myself, like Ken was saying, we all have our personalities, and you don't just change that just because you're in a meeting. And so it does take both that commitment and then the patience, hopefully others will have with me, speaking personally.
Okay, good. All right, excellent. So let me make sure that I got the essence of it. So patience and commitment, right? Coming from everyone's coming from a different perspective, right? So be committed to make the change or make changes, right? And allow time for change to happen, right? And that's from a personal perspective, that it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, so it's a process, right? That's my phrasing there. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Okay. Anyone else want to add to that, or add some other ideas or thoughts or perspectives that you have?
I wanted to add one more thing about this intent conversation. And for me, I think one way I think about Governor Boyd's rule and my rule sort of fitting together is sometimes we talk about intent versus impact. So I can have a good intent, but it can still have a negative impact. And both are true. So I still had good intent, and that's great. And also, you know, my concern about wanting the feedback is so that I can know that if despite my good intent, there was a negative impact, I can understand that and avoid doing it in the future or make repairs or however I want to use that information.
Okay, good. So intent versus impact, and just paraphrasing Tara, so understand, despite having, as an example, good intent, I can have a negative impact, and you want feedback, right? If that happens, right? If that happens, and that can very well happen, and particularly in any situation, but in this work, it can happen, right? Because sometimes we're stumbling, right, for the answers to try to get there. Excellent. Okay, intent versus impact. Anyone else want to add to that, or have feelings about that particular idea of intent versus impact?
CFO Perez has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Yes, please.
I find there's one word that's kind of the underlying fundamental here. A lot of great things have been said, but I find that candor is really a basic element of any type of established communication, participation, meetings, assignments, civility, etc. To that, I'd say that without candor, you can never have feedback, right? Which is a lot of us what we're saying to the intent and the, you have a good intent, but you have a negative impact. If there's no candor, you'll never know. And this last one has been said around the table a lot, which is the respect factor, right? But that first one, candor, I really think that's very, very critical.
Okay, so Ken, let me make sure. Thank you very much, Jorge. So let me make sure that I've got this. So it is you must have candor, and the idea of practicing candor, right? And without candor, you can never have feedback. And then you're reinforcing the notion of respect, right? That respect is critical. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, I see someone else. I thought I saw a hand. For those that haven't participated and would like to add their thoughts about what you need personally and of this group, I'd love to hear from you if you feel comfortable adding information.
Kevin has his little blue hand up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I can't see them. Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, just a couple things that come to mind in thinking about what you would want from a group and learning is engagement would be one that I would ask for. And
Kevin, can you speak up just a little bit? It's a little hard hearing you.
Yes, so engagement would be one thing I think that would be important. And that looks different to different people. It doesn't mean that you're just coming and talking and contributing. engagement can be that you're just very intently listening, but engagement seems important. And then a willingness to listen. And I know as attorneys, we're kind of conditioned to listen enough to make the next argument is sort of what we're conditioned to do, but just really coming and being really willing to listen to other perspectives and other people.
Okay. And Kevin, can you talk just a little bit more about engagement? I'm sorry, you're look at your face. Just a little bit more to kind of, because it's a word that we use a lot. So let's just talk about that in practice.
Yeah, and I kind of relate this to when I'm teaching students. So the kind of fundamental agreement you make with students at the beginning of a class when you're teaching is that, you know, the fundamental thing you need and the threshold thing you need is engagement, because you're not going to learn if you're not engaged. And that doesn't mean that you're the student that always stands up and says something or participates. Engagement can be that you're just intently listening to learn, but that you're checked in. And yeah.
Okay, good. To learn. Okay, so engagement, right? You're not going to learn if you're not engaged. You're intently listening to learn. Willingness to listen, right? And listening to others' perspectives as kind of the essence of it. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay. Someone else. Let's see if we've got any more. These are really, really powerful. Anyone else have anything to add if you haven't had an opportunity, or if you'd like to add other potential agreements that haven't been mentioned, or you want to reinforce or sign on to something that's already been said? Anybody? Seeing hands?
How about be aware of groupthink and the concept, like the thalidomide baby and the space shuttle decision.
Okay, good. So be aware of groupthink. And tell me, while we've got you there, this is great. Tell me how might you, so you'll be aware of groupthink, how might you put that in practice?
Actually, I advocate something akin to an informal, but not, by the book, Robert's Rules of Order for meetings where people who want to play devil's advocate because they have these nagging actual doubts and they want them resolved. And sometimes in order not to insult people, they have to say, oh, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I don't necessarily believe this, but it's this nagging thing like Columbo, my supervisor wants me to clear this thing up, so people. And Robert's Rules of Order is before they decide on a course of action, like poison all these pregnant women and launch the space shuttle, when the engineers, my brother was one of those engineers, so he sent some of those warning emails, something terrible is going to happen. And so even though the decision's already made, somebody needs to at least be heard. But sometimes they're we already decided that. So it's like it's something that juries can learn in deliberations.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anyone want to add that or get more clarification for that? So be aware of groupthink and the mention of Robert's Rules as a process way to be aware of that and to practice not falling into groupthink. Anyone? How might you put that into practice? Anybody want to add to it? Like not becoming victims, if you will, of groupthink. Yes, please.
Governor Peterson.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I guess my point would be along what Director Platchy said. It's, I think as attorneys, we really get into this, I guess it's a good habit if you're in the courtroom, but it's not necessarily a good habit when it comes to these type of discussions. But when you're listening to make an argument instead of listening to try to understand, right? So I think one of the keys is that you're really kind of listening from a point of view of how can I really understand where this person is coming from? Because we all live under a different set of assumptions. We all live under a different set of judgments. We all live under a different point of view on almost every single issue to some degree. So the ability to really listen and really truly understand and ask follow-up questions if you don't understand where they're coming from, I think is very helpful. And to do that with a sense of empathy, and kind of in as much of a non-judgmental way as you can is very helpful, because we all have, like I said, a set of judgments and assumptions that we mostly unconsciously live our lives on, live every day, with. So obviously that's very hard, but I think that is important to the discussion.
Okay, excellent. Okay, let me repeat it to make sure that I've got it. So listen to try to understand. Listen from a point of view of where the other person is coming from, or other people are coming from. Listen truly to understand, and ask follow-up questions if you don't, and do so with a sense of empathy, because we all have a set of judgments and perspectives. Does that summarize it? Did I miss anything? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone want to add to that, or seek any clarification to that, or even importantly, how might you put this into practice, right? Because it really matters in those moments where you're there. Anybody want to comment? Okay. All right. Okay, we'll go one more. We're almost at time, but I want to go just a few more if you have more to add, because this is very important for the work that you're going to embark on. And also we want to make sure that we're giving everyone an opportunity to be heard and to contribute. Anyone have anything else to add? Anything that you've missed that you see as critical? Something that you must be as a group, or something that you must have as a group in order to be successful in this learning and development endeavor?
So I jotted down three things, but I believe they're just different words for other thoughts. I wrote down open-minded, civil discourse, and thoughtful and considered action. But I think those all three have been covered by others.
And let me get the third one. So we said, I'm going to ask you a few questions if you don't mind. So open-minded, civil discourse, and it was thoughtful.
Thoughtful and considered action.
Considered action. Okay, great. Thank you. Let me ask you about all three of these a little bit. So the practice, tell me a little bit more about what open-mindedness looks like.
So when I originally thought about this before we started expressing our thoughts, I wrote it as a sentence.
Ah, good.
An open-minded civil discourse that leads to thoughtful and considered action. And when you put those all together, I think that's how we act best. That's how we do best. That's how we logically and appropriately address issues, problem solve, and come to a conclusion.
Okay, good. Okay, so we've got the sentence works. It leads to thoughtful and considered action. And just for clarification, civil discourse, what does that look like? What is that? What are the things? Kind of strip away that a little bit. What does that look like? Let's get behind the term.
Yeah, and originally I had civil discussion. I crossed out discussion and wrote discourse, because sometimes people have very strong feelings one way or another on an issue. We've seen that repeatedly over the course of years. So discourse does not have to be it just has to be civil. We can agree, but we disagree civilly.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. You're with me. Good. Okay. Anyone want to add or seek any clarification? For we've got open-minded, civil discourse, thoughtful and considered action. Okay. Anyone? Okay, going once.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to say too much, but I went to a CLE on the death penalty in Philadelphia, and they had all these people who were on the same team, social workers, co-counsels, and so forth. And in order to, they had to make a decision with unity on how to proceed, what witnesses to call, and actions. And they all came from different backgrounds, and some of them hated each other. And what happened was they arrived at a decision that ended up saving the client's life in hindsight, but it required them to have discussions with great hostility and throwing shoes at each other all night. And that turned out to be sort of a crucible where the best decision came out. So people should always keep in mind, I believe in decision quality as a product, as a goal, without too much emphasis on daintiness.
Okay. All right. Let me make sure I think I've got the core here. So making this is, and you'll correct me if I missed it. So make decisions with unity, right? And for the best decision.
You have to.
You have to. Okay. So as an agreement.
If you have to.
Okay, good. All right, so make decisions with unity. And just tell me a little bit, so what are some of the behaviors or characteristics of unity? Just to make sure when I'm going back to the notes to synthesize this for you.
Oh, well, in one instance, I spent the whole day with these people at the CLE. In one instance, there was a Marine who was gruff, and he was trying to mitigate and talk to victims and their children of the mass murderers, victims, and so they didn't want to let him interview the victims to try and soften them up, because after all, he was a right-wing Marine, a Trump guy. And it turned out that he insisted and screamed and believed he was personally insulted. And they finally relented and let him do all those duties, let's get assigned them. And it turned out that he was the best person possible to do it. And he saved the guy from the death penalty. So there are, people do take things personally. And sometimes you have to call them on it and hash it out. And it's very unpleasant. And some people have tempers, but then in the end, they still hate each other, but they realize they had to go through that and listen to each other and be introspective. And if there had been a supervisor who said, now, shut up, you're insulting that person, and you can't make them feel good, that guy might have been executed. It's something that I didn't understand until I spent the day with these people.
Okay.
You think you know everything, and then something happens, and then it's all back to square one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think I've got the essence of it. Thank you. Okay. So we're at time, and I want to be respectful of your time. So quickly, let me talk about next steps. What I will do is I will take this information and I'll start to synthesize it into the common themes that are emerging. And you can see some of the patterns that are starting to emerge here. So we'll do that and get that back to you so that you can move to next steps. And if there are any additional questions today, I want to take a few minutes to answer those and then to wrap up. Anyone have any questions or thoughts or anything that we missed, or any questions about the process or why these are important to embarking on this learning journey together?
Actually, maybe we could also spend a few moments hearing about what people the board might be interested in being educated about or learning about.
Good, that's great. Anybody want to? Any topics or areas that you want to start thinking about as you start to plan for your training needs in the journey? Not seeing any hands.
and maybe that's something that we can take with us throughout this next couple of days too, that as people think about what we've discussed today, we can think about, what we would like to see going further. We have a year.
Okay.
That might be something that's a continuing discussion that we will have.
Okay, perfect. Good. All right. So as I said, what I will do is I'm going to take the information and synthesize it so that you see what you've talked about. And again, there are several common themes that have emerged. And so I'll hand it back to Governor Majumdar to wrap up.
Wrapped.
Well done.
President Giacchetti.
Thank you, Mr. Turner and immediate past President Majumdar. We appreciate that discussion. We are, I think, at lunchtime. We start up again. Executive Director Nevitt, 1 o'clock. Are we starting up? All right. And so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this topic. We'll release you all for lunch.